Hello and welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars pod and installment number 5, I think, of the Peninsular War saga. I'm looking at my guests to see if they know whether or not this is installment number 5, and they are as clueless as I am, which is somehow oddly reassuring. Josh Provan is back with me, the master of adventures in Historyland, author of Bullock's Grain and Good Madeira and Wild East, and the author of a forthcoming title, which can we reveal the details of yet?
Why not? Why
Why
not?
not?
It's on the Helion website.
Okay, so it's not exactly breaking news then.
Well,
Um,
it depends how many people go to my page on the Helion website.
there is that. But you're doing a book on the Siege of Pensacola. You've gone all American War of Independence on us, haven't you?
I've gone back in time. I've gone into the 18th century.
That's the
I've
dark side.
I've told no, it's the bright side. It's
It's
the
really
bright
not.
side. It's
It's
so
not.
it's so pretty. It's so pretty. It's so pretty in the 18th century. Come join us.
Is it though? I mean, there's just more lace going on in the
And
18th century.
that's why it's more pretty. That's why it's prettier.
But I don't look good in lace.
You don't know until you try.
No, I
You really
do.
don't.
I can imagine you looking resplendent in lace, Josh. I truly can. I think you've got the hair for it, but me, I can't pull off lace. I just can't.
I was reading Duffy yesterday, Christopher Duffy. The military experience in the what is it, the Age of Reason, and he summed it up really well when he said that it seemed like in the 18th century nobody was capable of creating anything ugly. Even the graffiti was written in it with flourishes.
This is true. This is
Anyway,
certainly true.
the book is entitled Every Hazard and Fatigue, Siege of Pensacola, but it's not the American Revolution you all know. It is the story of the Spanish campaign along the Gulf Coast.
Yes. You do have a habit of picking up topics that nobody's even aware of and then doing books on them, don't you?
Yes,
Uh,
because I
I,
like to punish myself.
I shudder to think what you would do if you picked up your pen and did a history of the Peninsular War. I fear you might be dangerous.
I used to actually think that I needed to do that. And to be honest with you, the amount of people who write about Waterloo and all of Napoleon's campaigns suggests that one does, but actually there are a lot of very talented writers working on specific parts of the Peninsular War. So I haven't found my crazy niche section of that war yet to go to, despite the fact that prior to my coming online, I was principally sort of like the Wellington guy, the guy who like read everything about Wellington. So it's been a strange reversal that that until you asked me to do this show, nobody talked to me about the Duke of Wellington.
Yes, and we're gonna sort of immerse ourselves deeply in Wellington for this one. There is a meme that is circulating on the internet about historians' theory and archive, and it's basically one of the is it one of the people from Sesame Street or one of the Muppets? And you've got theory on one side, which is like represented by fruit or something, and then you've got this suspicious white powder that we'll call flour. And the idea is that the Muppet or whatever it is
It says
buried.
it's Elmo. It's Elmo from Sesame
Elmo,
Street.
thank you, because I'm like so down with the kids and all that. You could see how sheltered my childhood was. But Elmo is buried face first in this white powder that is definitely not some suspicious substance, um, and is inhaling deeply from it. But that is us today because we've done some stuff on the Spanish contribution recently. We've looked at Cantabria, we've looked at the origins and how that is fundamentally a Spanish with a bit of a sprinkling of Portuguese concern. Um, we've also done the guerrillas with Charles Esdale, but today we are going to look at the sort of, I was going to call it a midlife crisis that Britain has over the Convention of Cintra. I'm not sure it's necessarily midlife in any particular way, but it is certainly a crisis of confidence. So there is much gnashing of teeth that goes on over Cintra. That's for sure. Folks, if you missed the Vimeiro and Releaser episode, which set this one up effectively. We broke off literally at the point that Kellerman rides into camp. Then you need to go back through the back catalogue and pick that one up. I believe it's episode number 3. Scroll through the listing, you will find it. So yeah, let's dive ourselves right in. We left it at Vimeiro, 21st of August, 1808, and a very unhappy Sir Arthur Wellesley. Just give people a reminder why the disgruntlement from young Arthur. Well, he's not young at this point, is he? Let's face it. But why is Arthur disgruntled?
Well, if we remember what occurred before, most people won't be surprised to find out that he's angry. I mean, he has a kind of a grumpy reputation anyway, but he's generally unhappy because he hasn't been able to slaughter Frenchmen in the manner that he wished to do so. I feel like it's sort of like banging an already overly abused drum. But Wellington, at this point, was not known as a cautious general. This was the Wellington at India. That was his reputation when he came back. And there are plenty of accounts which sort of say, you ain't in India anymore, mate. You can't just go around galloping around chasing down Pindaris like you did back in the day. And having pulled off the victory that he pulled off at Vimeiro, a victory that most people didn't actually expect to happen, he was superseded, not once but twice, within a frighteningly short amount of time, first by Harry Burrard and then by Sir Hugh Dalrymple. And both of them did not want him to go and slaughter Frenchmen. Even though Sir John Moore was of the opinion that if Wellesley had been left to his own devices, he'd have been in Lisbon the next day.
Yeah, I'm not sure Moore quite understands the kind of like the distances involved there. I think perhaps
that may return to haunt him.
Indeed. Yeah, that's a very good point, which we will save for another episode. But yes, Moore and the realities of geography in the region perhaps aren't natural bedfellows. But more on that at another time. The other thing is that, so as you say, in comes Harry Burrard, literally at the moment of victory. Well, just before, he lets Wellesley finish the fight off. And then at the moment that Wellesley's going, great, I've seen off these assaults. What's next? It's all yours, Sir Harry. I've set this up for you. Shall we go and follow up on this victory? Because bear in mind, as I always say, Wellesley doesn't have his Austerlitz moment where he goes and crushes an army. This is, strangely, I think this is perhaps as close as he ever gets. And of course, he's not in the driving seat anymore. So Harry basically goes, no. Because there are concerns about maybe there's French cavalry lurking over the hill, and this over prudence on the part of Burrard, which sees him get berated in the long term. It doesn't go well for him. And then you've also, as you say, got Dalrymple, who's on the scene.
Yeah, they come at it from sort of two different angles. Burrard comes at it from, you can sort of defend his point of view that he doesn't really know what's going on. But, Rory Muir is completely right. The man did not deserve the rank he had to actually make that call, not to trust the officers on the ground when practically the entire army was saying we had them. And like as we said in the Vimeiro episode, this is actually the closest Wellesley comes in Portugal and Spain, in Iberia, to getting the major decisive victory, which would have actually, think about it, this would have actually been the second French army to utterly surrender in the same year. Bailen has happened. That plays a big part in what happens next, actually, the fact that all the French have run away to the Ebro. and that Juno is left alone in Portugal.
That's why you end up with a Vimeiro situation in the first place, right? Juno knows there's no support coming over the hill. He is it, and that's why he needs to go after Wellesley.
But Dalrymple comes in with from a slightly different cautious angle, and so okay, right, we haven't pursued, we haven't basically forced them to surrender on the spot. Right, okay, they're still in a terrible position. We can still advance. We can still take Lisbon. Wellesley makes his suggestions to Dalrymple, and Dalrymple says no, because Dalrymple is on the opinion of quite a lot of the opposition. Well, I don't know if it's exactly the opposition, because actually back home everybody was very excited about what was going on. But there was a class of soldier and politician that thought that Wellesley had gone off his rocker and was acting very recklessly in Portugal. And Dalrymple thought that if like the slightest thing went wrong, that Wellesley would have been destroyed because he was too far away from the navy. So he says, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to push our luck. We're not going to push the French up against a wall. We're just going to see what happens, basically. Wellesley even was saying, get Moore to Santarem and cut them off because now the longer you wait, the more chance they have of getting to Elvas or someplace like that where they can actually defend themselves. And it's just that the French don't actually know what a lucky break they've got, that they don't go and do that.
Yeah, you can sort of understand perhaps a little more Dalrymple's caution, because the moment has passed. Barada squandered that initial opportunity to push and harry the French so hard that they just do not have that opportunity to pause and regroup. Sure, they've only had sort of 24, 48 hours, but that can be a long time in terms of just letting the men breathe, get back to their units, get some food in their belly, give them fresh ammunition, and get them on parade. And then suddenly they feel a bit more like a soldier and a bit less like a frightened rebel. So with that opportunity gone, Dalrymple's then left to work out, as you say, what happens next. There is a lot of concern that if you push more to Santarem, has he got enough men to not get swamped fundamentally by
there are real possibilities that Dalrymple was just sort of had a proper concern for the prudence of sort of sound military sort of sense, and he didn't want to let these two younger generals just go running around fighting people like swashbucklers and stuff. However, as it proves, had Moore been sent to Santarem and had Wellesley been allowed to push them from the front, the superior numbers at play would have almost certainly ensured the total and unconditional surrender of Junot's force, because actually the French are outnumbered, they're demoralized, and they have no escape if that happens.
I think part of the issue here is that Dalrymple doesn't have extensive battlefield experience. He might be senior, but he's senior in part because he's lived longer. I mean, born 1750, Scottish descent. He's been in the army since before Wellington was even in nappies. So he's in the army from 1763, apologies. Serves in Flanders. Well, that's always a chastening experience, isn't it? Then he's Lieutenant Governor of Guernsey, acting Governor of Gibraltar. These are not, your sort of Wellingtonian style, Wesleyist style. We'll go with Wesleyist. Can't really have Wesleyonian, can you?
Wesleyan is a religious movement, so probably not.
Yeah,
Wesleyan, sorry.
Wesleyan, yes.
It's too close to Wesleyan.
Which I believe is part of the reason why you have the name change, but I digress. The desire to not be associated. The point is, he's not cut his teeth fighting, well, anybody, really. He's been doing desk jobs. And I suspect there's sort of an element of that there. And of course, then in rides Kellerman, and his proposals are, hey, they're ballsy. Muir makes the point that Kellerman probably aims high, expecting to be haggled down, which is that's how negotiations work, right? Somebody presents you with your first offer and you do not turn around and go, yeah, all right then, that sounds like a sound basis for a deal. So the proposals are: the French army evacuates Portugal, the Royal Navy transports them out by sea back to France. None of them are going to be declared prisoners of war. They take their weapons, equipment, ammunition, and private property with them. Private property being a rather loose term that is considered quite loosely by all concerned, although it does become a point of contention. And the French collaborators are granted immunity plus 12 months to leave Portugal without being harassed. And there's also a provision that the Russian squadron in the Tagus is permitted to leave without any consequences to it. And as I say, that should have been like a point where people turned around and go, well, we're not quite going to do all of that. Here's our starting point. And instead, they're basically accepted. There's some small points of deliberation. What are you going to classify as private property here? Because everybody's aware, and Wellesley particularly is one of the leading individuals who has misgivings about this. That scope to just sort of include the gold cross that you snaffled from a church amongst your private possessions. No, I've carried this with me all the way from France. It belongs. It's a long descendant heirloom. It's come on, really.
Really,
Nobody's buying that.
Because the cathedral in Lisbon is missing some stuff that's suspiciously similar.
Pure coincidence, Gov. Definitely, I don't know what the French is for Gov, but pure coincidence, Gov in French. That definitely wasn't me.
Yeah,
but
you really have to hand it to Kellerman. That,
yeah,
I mean, not only did he go in there and just sort of really try his best to get out of what looked like a terrible situation that he probably didn't expect much from, but once he figured out he had them, that they were actually listening to him, he was like, yes, absolutely. Let's keep going with this. Can you
it's
imagine when he
remarkable.
got back that night and he went to Juno and he was like, you are not going to believe what has just happened.
Can you imagine the conversation? Juno just kind of sitting there pouring him another glass of wine, going, "So tell me again about that moment where they agreed to everything that we wanted."
It's absolutely amazing. And by a crazy irony, this Kellerman actually, he commands the cuirassiers at Quatre Bras, but
It's the
it's
same guy.
briefly overrun the crossroads. One of the few French generals, therefore, to actually meet Wellington in person during the Peninsular War and the Napoleonic Wars, and then fight him.
Yeah, I mean, sort of almost betters Wellington twice, effectively,
Yeah, in a way,
because
in a way.
that's sort of what's happening here at Cintra. And then, of course, as you say, overruns the crossroads but can't hold it. So almost manages to lead the charge. Brave guy.
Very.
It's worth saying. Ballsy, but clearly with an intellect, or at the very least, an ability to read people to support that, as proven by what happens here. And then they agree this truce, right, with the aim of creating a convention along the lines that we've just talked about. And this is where it gets icky for Wellesley, because it's he and Kellerman who have to sign it. And this is something that Kellerman raises as a point of principle. Whereas Dalrymple is in charge and the buck stops with him on all decision making, and therefore agreeing to this is Dalrymple's decision. Kellerman insists that because Kellerman is not the head of the French army, it's not appropriate for the head of the British army to be the counter signatory. And so Wellesley's name is literally on this damn thing, that he's sitting there sort of going, there are bits of this that I have misgivings about. And it's not that he disagrees with everything. That's not the case. And we'll talk about that in a sec. There are elements that he's in favor of by this point because he acknowledges the strategic situation has changed. Things have moved on. But it does mean that suddenly when the news breaks back in England, this guy who's been the darling boy of Britain for about a fortnight, has suddenly gone and agreed to what now?
Hmm. It's a great example of things we still see today, actually, about news stories taking on their own sort of life. And it's especially the case in the 18th and 19th centuries when there is a delay as to accurate news. Um, we hinted at it before when I was talking about how people were sort of saying that in army circles, people were saying that Wellesley was too reckless and he was risking the army in Portugal by running around chasing a battle. The other side of that was that the Spanish Rising had gripped the public imagination quite strongly. And British successes compounding this, on top of news of Bailen, coming after Bessier's thrashing of the Spanish army just previous to that. It was like this massive up and down story that was suddenly going very well for the Allies, and the British public thought that their generals, their army, should be in it on this what realistically was looking like the first proper reverse of Napoleon's forces, of Napoleon's invincible machine. And when news of Vimeiro came in, they were like, "The Redcoats did it, by Jove! They've just shown the world that the Spanish did it first, and now we've just proved it. These guys are not gods. We're going to kick them out of Spain." And so then some troubling rumors start coming in, which makes the government, who are all also very excitedly talking about this, go rather quiet.
Too right. So, I mean, while we're there, let's dwell on this. So I jotted down the timetable for all of this news coming in. So 24th of July, news breaks about the Spanish defeat at the Battle of Rio Seco. So that's when you sort of start to get this initial dampening down of the enthusiasm. Then between the 8th and the 11th of August, news breaks of Bailen, and everybody just goes ballistic. Oh my God kind of moment. The Spanish have done this. This is a French army. This is the army that's humbled Europe because people aren't drawing distinctions about which units were deployed where. All that matters is that it's one of Napoleon's armies, and it's just gone and surrendered. We talked about this in the introductory episode. Then, 5 days later, you've got confirmation of Wellesley having landed safely, coming back to the UK. So it's one of those things that can keep the story rumbling on. Look, lads, we've just had this news about Bailen, but now the Brits have turned up. What can the Brits do? And there's this interesting point to be made that when was the last time the British Army did something really impressive? You've got Egypt, maybe?
It's probably Egypt.
And then before that, I am scratching my head.
Well, yeah, it's probably Seringapatam.
Yeah, probably. It's been a while coming. Well, I suppose you could say Asai.
That was 1803, though, so technically after Egypt.
Apologies, of course it is. Yes. The idiot moment there.
I almost did the same thing, but then I remembered just in time.
Just forget the dates. It's not like the dates are important or anything.
But there's Seringapatam, which was a very big deal, as you can see from the ridiculous amounts of paintings, lithographs, and loot.
Yeah, so the public hasn't had much to shout about when it comes to the British Army doing something for a heck of a long time.
Especially, and we should also say as well that as big a deal as Seringapatam was, nobody respected people who defeated Indian armies. And in Rory Moore's book, there's literally a guy who actually says, Junot's different than India. You won't be able to roll over him like you did in India. Which is one of the reasons why I wrote my book. But nobody respected Indian victory. So realistically, looking at Egypt.
Yeah. And then, of course, so you got the landing news on the 16th of August. 1st of September, so about a fortnight-ish later, the news breaks on Releasa and Vimeiro at the same time. So it's not as though, this gets drip fed. And yeah, everyone goes nuts. Even Cobbett's political register, which is very anti-government, describes the battle as, and we're talking about Vimeiro here, as being of far greater importance to us than the victory at Trafalgar.
Shots fired.
Yeah. Nelson called. He's got a thing or two to say about that. Not true, as we now know.
No, I mean, it's true. Trafalgar is not as significant as the Nile.
No,
but it's a much bigger battle.
absolutely. And you can see this in the caricatures as well. This is the point where the caricatures really get involved in the Peninsular War. After Cintra, they go awfully quiet. I'm generalizing a little bit. They probably go awfully quiet at least until Madrid gets taken by Wellington in 1812. You get the odd thing here and there, but nothing sort of event related until probably Madrid, and then subsequently Victoria. So this is how it captures the public imagination. And you've got things like the Last Harvest or British threshers making French crops, and you've got this brilliant image of Wellesley, who looks nothing like Wellesley. It's got to be said. It's just a guy, but he's cutting off Juno's long pigtails. You've got the British driving the French into the sea. Just a whole host of images that show that nobody really understands what has happened at this battle. It's just, hey, let's make some jokes at the point at the French, usually at the point of a bayonet being driven up somebody's bottom, because that is a popular trope of caricatures, it has to be said.
Definitely. And so what you have is this immense hype of what has been going on in Portugal. And that hits a brick wall. First of all, not because there's a convention. Everybody expects there to be a convention, but they expect it to be an unconditional surrender. They expect that in the next gap of news, that the British are going to do everything basically that Wellesley said should have been done. And everybody in the government expected should have been done. And instead, despite what some people say about Cintra was sort of the will of the government, it wasn't. And this brings us to why Wellesley agreed with parts of the convention and not others. And that is essentially that he agreed that by this point, the French needed to get out, be taken away from Portugal. So he was all for getting Navy ships, put the French on them and send them somewhere. This was partially because he and Moore and most of the other officers in the army had no faith that Dalrymple should be let alone in command of operations.
Which is probably an accurate assessment,
Probably
should be said.
Yeah. But that's really where the buck kind of, buck is the wrong word, it's the wrong analogy, but that's really where his approval stopped. Because as soon as Dalrymple had invited him, and this is what happened in the room, this was in the room where it happened, to quote Hamilton, he was there. Dalrymple, having heard Kellerman's argument that you are not of equal rank, this is the niceties need to be observed here, very proper, very cool. The man is ice cool. Talking about, most people would be just desperate to get the ink on the paper. The general's signing it as well. Awesome. But he goes, no, sir, no, please get someone of my rank in here just to make sure everything is proper. Good grief. Play poker with that guy.
No thanks. I'd lose my entire fortune. Fortune. Like threepence halfpenny in an afternoon. Gone.
Yeah, and so Dalrymple turns to Wellesley and asks him if he would sign. Now, he invited him to sign. He didn't order him to sign. But on the other hand, it should be noted as well that an invitation from a superior officer is generally treated as an order. And it would have looked very bad of him to say no in front of a French general. I don't have any faith in this convention, and storm out. That just isn't how things are done. So Wellesley signs it. He shouldn't have, for his own sake, not necessarily because he could have done anything about it. But
Yeah, I think it would have looked incredibly petty had he not, right? This sort of idea of, well, you've taken over, and it would also have been quite subversive, and that's not a good look either. But there are a couple of extracts that I just want to read, folks, in relation to Wellesley himself justifying. So immediately that he's signed it, the next day he's writing to Castlereagh, who is Secretary of State for War in the Colonies, so the guy who's in charge of the British government's war efforts, fundamentally, not to be confused with the Secretary at War. Yes, there's a Secretary for War and a Secretary at War, and they do different things. I don't have the time to explain the complexities and nuances of this system right now, people. But Wellesley's writing to Castlereagh, and he says, although my name is affixed to this instrument, I beg that you will not believe that I negotiated it, that I approve of it, or that I had any hand in wording it. I object to an indefinite suspension of hostilities. It ought to have been 48 hours only. However, I approve of allowing the French to evacuate Portugal. And a few days later, he writes to William Wellesley Pole, basically talking along similar lines, and says, I also think that some measures must be adopted to force the French generals to disgorge some of the church plate which they have stolen. So those are two of the key areas. The other being this idea that the Russian squadron just gets away scot-free, but Dalrymple turns around and goes, no, this is happening, just be quiet. And there you have it. His name is on it. Immediately having done so, he kind of wants to go home, doesn't he? He's done at that point.
he is really. There's nothing. I mean, there's literally nothing else to do but to help transport the French and their baggage out of the country and the Russian squadron. It should be remembered there was a great expectation that the Russian squadron under Semyonov, I think it's Semyonov, should have been captured as well, because at the time, I believe that a state of war existed between Russia and Britain, or at least if they weren't fully at war yet, they were hostile and could have been seized. They were in the Tagus. It was expected, basically, the Russian ships and the French would have gone in the bag. But no, a lot of them are going to be ferried away. And Wellesley basically who was like a month before in command of the entire army, is given like 6 battalions to look after. He's really bored. He writes home that he wants to be quit of the army as quickly as possible. The opportunity presents itself that he can do so because of I think something happens in Ireland where he's still chief secretary or something.
So I think it's his undersecretary who dies, and that therefore leaves him in a position where he either needs to go home and sort things out because there's nobody there running affairs in Ireland now, or he needs to resign. And so that kind of gives him the opportunity to turn around and say, look, can I go? But as you say, he's writing home, and there's a sort of an air of sulk in this letter. Let me just read it to you. I wish that I was away from this army. Things will not flourish as we are situated and organized. There is no more confidence in me on the part of the chiefs than if I had been unsuccessful. They ask my opinion about everything and never act according to it. Is this the confidence in the opinion of a man who has conducted the service successfully to the present moment, which is to make him responsible to his friends in the government for the events which will occur here? It is quite ridiculous, but there is not one of them capable of commanding the army, and at this moment it rests with me. The departments look to me alone. Proof, if you needed it, that Wellington was a narcissist and also a bit of a drama queen when it came to things not going his way. Rory Muir does make the point that Wellington has a propensity towards despair if things don't go the way that he's hoping.
Especially at this point, yes, you'll often get these sort of letters going back if there's something he's not happy about. There was a particular point in India where he wasn't getting the jobs he wanted. And the tone returns similarly to that sort of thing. The problem is, and Wellington is ridiculously annoying when it comes to this sort of thing, is that he's usually accurate.
No, that's exactly what I'm thinking, is that he's sitting there sulking, but actually the sulk is valid because
Yeah.
he's got it right.
Realistically, yes. All of that he was moaning about is completely true. And it was borne out in the inquiry, which we'll get to in a second, pretty much. Um, he's right as well that the army had completely adopted him as their man. At
Yeah.
first, they didn't know who he was. They didn't have a great deal of faith in him. But then he delivers them. But then he delivers this campaign in which he acts aggressively. He defeats the French twice, but practically, Rolitha is a sort of like an intermediate thing, but it is essentially a victory. He defeats them twice, and he takes care of the army. There is I just tweeted it before we went on. I got really geeky and happy about it because it here's these guys scoffing about the India officer coming in and trying to take on the French, and he just does it, which bears out what one of his officers in India used to actually said was that nobody can conceive the difficulties of fighting in India, and if you can fight there successfully, you can fight anywhere. And in comes Wellesley with his like minute attention to detail and logistics, and he does that in Portugal. And one of Moore's officers compares him favorably against Moore because he had fought under Wellesley and Moore, and he said the first thing you notice is that we're not being taken as the care is not there, the logistics is not being paid attention to, even on a good day. And that made me smile because I was thinking you learned that's India right there. That's India, Wellesley. And so, he's the only one. I mean, it's the sulk is true. It's real. Nonetheless sulky, but it has merit. And he does get to go home, but not to the response that the army gives him, because the army actually knows what's going on, and most officers in the army are actually very impressed.
So much so that there's actually a whip round, or the equivalent of a whip round, and they buy him some silver plate, which I believe they have inscribed with Vimeiro. And it kind of extols his virtues, and news of this ends up in the papers. That's how I first came across this particular story, and because people like to, they stick their name to this list of subscribers so that Wellesley knows who's backing him. Should there ever come a time when he can return the favor. Remember that time when I've got no idea what happens to the plate. It may end up in Apsley House. I don't know. Marcus would be the one to know. I mean, he did manage the place. But yeah, as you say, the reception he gets when he's back home is a lot less favorable. People kind of hissing and hooting at him in the streets as he's traveling through the countryside. And all he can do is put a brave face on it. I must say, the situation probably isn't helped by his brother, who then starts sort of putting out these sort of a version of this idea that Wellesley didn't want to sign it. He's been forced into it. And it's not quite clear if it's just sort of a misinterpretation, a sort of Chinese whispers effect. Wellesley has misgivings about it. Wellesley didn't want to sign it. And then suddenly Wellesley was pushed into signing it. And then all of a sudden it kind of gets turned into, so Hugh Dalrymple put a gun to Wellesley's head and said, if you don't sign this, you're never going to breathe again, sort of thing. That's not what happened, people.
We've been through this.
That.
Exactly. We just talked about this. He could have said no if he wanted to, and at the same time he couldn't really say no. So it's a difficult thing. But this is what happens. He comes back, and the public is utterly outraged.
The irony is, before news broke of Cintra, he could have got a peerage. In fact, there were maneuverings to try and get him a peerage, because of his brothers, the Earl of Mornington.
Richard Wellesley, and You know what you were saying about, yeah, all he can do is put a brave face on it. I was thinking about this today. Actually, he does a very good job of putting a brave face on it. Um, he remains very cool in the face in public whenever he's presented, when he has to go through these towns and sort of suffer these indignities when he's questioned by other officers, things like that. He remains very cool, as if there's no problem, which is sort of classic later Wellington sort of how he deals with things. Meanwhile, Richard is desperately trying to fix everything before, he feels he's lost. I don't know. It's the classic thing. One says, just be calm. I know what happened. We have the documentation to prove it. We'll be fine eventually. But Richard was always very sensitive about, the press. So he completely spirals out of control.
You can see why, though, when you look
Oh
at
yeah.
some of those press reports. So I'm quoting the Times here. We can hardly refrain from shedding tears. The common cause has suffered most grievously by this expedition to the Tagus. It has been cruelly detrimental to our affairs and, above all, to our character. And this is the thing that really gets me, actually. There's a lot of talk about the shame and the stigma that's attached to Cintra, to the point where that almost appears to become more important than everything else. I'm really struck by a caricature that's pushed around at this time, which is called Whitlock the Second, or Another Tarnish to British Valor, because let's not think about the Portuguese here, who are the real. In fairness, the caricature does emphasize, the Portuguese are being screwed by this. And you've got this Portuguese guy kind of going, "Is this British valor?" Kind of underlining the point. But it's this sort of sense of, we're British, we have this honourable reputation, and it's being ruined by this horrendous convention, and that seems to irk people more than more than other elements, and I think that's quite curious in itself.
It is. It is an interesting mindset, especially when you consider how few opportunities the British have had to prove their valor in the sense that they're talking about here. Um, but at the same time, it does sort of reinforce to us that the British weren't really in this for the sort of you know humanitarian reasons that were sort of touted. They do have their own agenda apart from liberating Portugal. The liberation of Portugal is a means to an end, as is with Spain. And this, as Wellesley said, and as many people said, the convention undoes the good of Vimeiro and the campaign. It turns it into essentially a defeat in a strange way. I mean, yes, they take Lisbon and they remove the French from southern Portugal, but at the same time, the French have not lost anything but the men they lost at Vimeiro, and in a sense, you can sort of see that the dead of those battles sort of saying, what did I die for
I
then?
think the irony here is that if you hadn't had Relisa and Vimeiro, but had got to Cintra through a series of skirmishes, or even something, a battle that was less convincing a defeat and less comprehensive a defeat for the French as Vimeiro. Folks, if you've missed it, listen to the last episode. The French get hammered, utterly broken. There's pretty much nothing left for them to fight with.
Yeah, well, I think Wellesley actually calls it like an unmerciful thrashing or something like that.
If you hadn't had a British victory of that scale, then actually Cintra's not bad. But because fundamentally, the first aim of the campaign has to be, let's get the French out of Portugal. Cintra gets the French out of Portugal. Tick. Very good. Nice. What's next? But the point is that you've had Bylan, right? And as you say, there's this expectation of a second Bylan in the form of Vimeiro, especially when the news comes through. So this therefore feels like sort of the damp squib, the big disappointment that starts to really begin knocking the wind out of the sails. And the British government can try and put a brave face on it, and they fire the Tower guns and sort of make out, oh, it's this great victory. But they're playing a political game, and nobody's buying it. Nobody's even remotely nibbling at it. And so the story rumbles and rumbles and rumbles some until the point where you have an inquiry called. And it's not until November that that inquiry convenes. And initially, the conversation is, do you court martial Dalrymple in the same kind of way that Whitlock? So we talked about Whitlock II. Whitlock was in command of the second invasion of the River Plate. He's then court-martialed for the surrender of Montevideo. There is talk of, do we court-martial Dalrymple? And the Judge Advocate General, no, I'm not going to go into crime and punishment rabbit hole, people, don't worry. But he is in charge of military justice. So he's consulted a guy called Richard Ryder at this point in time. And he basically said, well, look, you can't really court-martial him right now because you need precise charges. So you need an inquiry to establish the full facts of the situation to then be able to put those charges down, because he's a general. This is going to be a complex case. It's not like charging somebody for desertion. And so that's kind of what the inquiry's sort of there to do, is, what's happened here? Are there the grounds for taking this further? And what's amazing is that, so this is convened in Chelsea Hospital. I believe it's held in the Great Hall at Chelsea. Don't quote me on that, folks, but I think that's
so.
Right. And people can attend. So I was going through the papers. We've now gone into a crime and punishment rabbit hole. I apologize, but this is relevant. I'm not going to talk about flogging.
It is. This is justice. This is the course of military justice and public justice and accountability in military affairs. This is your ball game. Go.
So he gets requests from the newspapers where they're going, yeah, so can I sit in on the proceedings? Is that allowed? Because people don't know. They genuinely do not know. It's kind of a different sort of scenario. Actually, Ryder doesn't know. Ryder has to sit down and think about this, and he writes this sort of tentative letter back, kind of going, well, there's no legal impediment, but his general tone is quite discouraging because he doesn't really want this turning into a big kind of fair of farcical proportions. So he doesn't really want the room crowded with reporters. And so they sit down and they work it out, and it takes about a month. Dalrymple tries to ruin Wellesley. That's my read of it. You were talking about this this concern that people had about Wellesley kind of going rogue. Describes the campaign as perilous, criticizes the comms with the fleet, describes them as precarious, dismissed Releaser and Vimeiro. There's a ballsy move. Oh, those two battles, they didn't mean anything. And then claims that the Vimeiro did more harm than good, because the French were really going to negotiate terms of surrender after Releaser, weren't they? The guy's got balls if he's detached from reality.
Yeah, and the difference, of course, between his gumption and Kellerman's gumption is that his is based on very little that can actually be held up, especially when Wellesley's turn comes around.
Yeah. I mean, Wellesley's actually told, I forget who by, but he's told, it might be by Spencer, in fact, to go easy on Berard, because Berard goes, look, he's an old man, he's got a family, I'm sure you don't want to ruin his career, old boy, sort of thing. And Wellesley's there going, the guy's trying to shaft me. I want to burn him.
Yeah. Yeah, because Berard has to come into this as well, and yeah, Spencer does. Look, Spencer prevaricates a little, and basically, probably honestly, if we're truly sort of going to sort of put an honest face on it, his testimony is something like, we didn't know the entire French army was broken. They could have had troops somewhere in reserve. That is to say, yes, Berard had a reason, not a great one, but a reason to not press the attack, and Wellesley wasn't happy about it.
The irony being, of course, that this is the same Spencer who is feeding Wellesley intelligence about the French forces and really not sort of then acting in accordance with it. Again, we covered this in the release from Vimeiro episode. Leaves these reports behind for Wellesley of actually, these French forces are much bigger than we anticipate. They're sort of in the region of, I think the numbers touted is 20,000 men. P.S. I've got about 3,000 that I brought up with me from Gibraltar. I'm taking them back down south on ship, and Wellesley's there going, "What are you doing? If your assessments are correct, I need those men. Come back." So you can see why Wellesley might have looked at what Spence was saying.
But think of his family. Think of his family, Sir Arthur. Yes.
Yes.
And to be fair, Barrard's family takes some hits. I saw that he only outlives one of his sons by a matter of months, I think.
He's buried near me, Barrard.
Oh, right.
He's in Lymington,
Okay.
about 10-ish miles down the road. I've tried to find his tomb, and I can't find it. I think I can find his daughter's tomb.
Okay.
And I'm starting to wonder if they're all buried. It's a very big
could be
chest tomb thing. They might all be buried on the same plot, but all I can make out is the faintest indications of one of his daughters being buried there. But in the church itself, there are plaques to the sons, and yeah, as you say, they die in rapid succession.
Yeah, one dies at Coruña, another one at San Sebastian, top and bottom of the Peninsular War. It was very kind of General Spencer to think of the old man in this term, but it to be honest, it has to be said Muir is scathing about Barrard's decision on the day of Vimeiro. It really did lead us to this point, because if he'd let Wellesley go, well, there wouldn't need to be a convention of Cintra inquiry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how the inquiry almost ends up being a damp squib in and of itself.
Yeah, in a way, because as you say, Dalrymple basically tries. I don't know if he realizes that he can't defend his position, and therefore basically sees the hate that Wellesley's getting, and basically just tries to either drag him down with him or just shine greater sort of spotlight on him. But that's what he tries to do. He tries to character assassinate Wellesley. And then Wellesley gets his turn to stand up and make his case, and obviously undoes everything he said. And as all those papers who were so angry and writing all those editorials about how he should and whatnot, and all those people who said he should be hanged. One guy actually said someone needed to be hanged for Cintra. Again, go silent as suddenly context, right? Okay, Wellesley's actually not the one to blame here.
Come, Josh. We live in 2023. Surely you know we live in a post-context world. Nobody needs context anymore. That's not important. I say this having just come off air with History Rage, where I've berated Colt Napoleon for a disinclination to consider context when sticking the guy on a pedestal, which is one of my pet peeves. I may have used the term "boil my piss." So you can imagine where I'm at with all of this. Yeah, the context is key. It's always key. It always gets missed. And the net result, though, is that the inquiry comes to a very sort of wishy-washy conclusion, where it basically goes, yeah, the convention was probably a decent call. We're not going to call anybody out. We are going to say, good job, Wellesley, thumbs up, tick, very good, more please in the future. And then that goes before the officials, and they basically turn around and go, and this is the Duke of York, I think it is, and goes, no, you're going to give me some kind of substantive response. You've been sat for about a month and a bit. Come on, sit down, do it properly. And so they have to reconvene. And even then, the majority decision by the judges. I believe there are 7 of them, and 6 of them are going that, yeah, this is the right call. The convention was the right thing to do. Moira manages to piss everybody off by being quite acerbic about, well, everybody, frankly. Wellesley's not happy with the assessment of the whole situation, but I believe Moira is associated with the opposition. So,
Yes, that was why he was chosen. York
yeah,
selected a handful of guys who were so that he would avoid any impartiality. York as well, supposedly, and I was talking about this in regards to the Earl of Chatham at the beginning. York actually wanted to be given command in Portugal. Is
yeah,
something that apparently was a thing.
because that would have really gone down well when the Marianne Clark
Mhm.
scandal broke in 1809. But
Quite.
hindsight, a wonderful thing.
So it's difficult to say, what his true feelings were on this when he demanded a better resolution, like a more firm kind of decision from the judges. But at the end, yeah, nothing particularly happened. There was the letter sent to Dalrymple talking about the king's disapprobation of the kindly treatment of the French, essentially. But that was essentially it.
Yeah, I mean, they're never formally disgraced, either of them, Berard or Dalrymple. They never command in the field again.
No,
Dalrymple manages to sort of wrangle a couple of openings for himself, but yeah, neither of them are in the field. But for Wellesley, it's I don't know if it has done him any favors. He's a known quantity now. I mean, he's been in the public eye for pretty much all of the summer and autumn between setting sail, release of Vimeiro, then the convention, and he's swung from being the darling to the object of ridicule to sort of a bit of both.
yeah, I
He's
don't think
kind of
any.
tainted by association, but
Yeah,
people are kind of going, well, actually, it's not quite as bad as we thought originally.
I don't know if anybody knows what to do with him at the second. It's the winter now. It's December, I think, by the time it fully packs up, and that is problematic in itself because by the end of the month, Moore will be retreating into the mountains of Galicia.
In
But that
fact, it's not until late December that they're having these sort of squabblings about no, this isn't good enough. I think it's 24th December that they present their initial report, probably hoping to have a quiet Christmas and New Year. And then the Duke of York turns around and goes, "No, come back." And of course, in early January, Moore's dead,
mm, yeah,
and that's a problem in itself because then who's gonna take command? Because we sent out Berard and Dalrymple, we're not sending them out again. We've just lost one of the darling boys of the army. Sure, yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, and this made me chuckle. Chatham thinks that he might be in the offing. York is interested, but you still got this guy
even
Wellesley.
Tarleton from the American Revolution thinks he should have a shot.
Interestingly, Paget seems to know, even before Moore's dead, Paget seems to know that Wellesley's a problem for him
Yeah, it's
in the
a
sense that,
seen the quote. Yeah,
yeah, that he sees Wellesley's ability and he goes, it's a shame he's below me in the promotion lists because I'm not going to serve. They're going to send this guy out, and I can't come out because I'm senior, and nominally I would take command. I'd
mm-hmm.
take precedence. I'm more senior, and he knows that's not going to happen because he can see Wellesley's the talent.
Mm-hmm. This is I was a little unsure because there are a few Paget. There are 2 principal Pagets. This is Uxbridge Paget, I think.
I
Yes,
believe so. Yeah.
and that's just a little, and that's nice that you brought that up because there's sort of a persistent myth that Paget, who becomes the Earl of Uxbridge, doesn't go back to Spain because of the fact he has an affair with Wellington's sister, I think it is, or
No,
sister-in-law.
it's sister-in-law, so it's Henry's
Yes,
wife.
yes. But
I mean,
actually,
how inbred is this whole situation? Henry is the British ambassador to Spain.
yes, he is. Yeah, they're all in. It was the same in India. I mean, they were all
Exactly, Mornington. You know,
yes.
he's in command in
Yeah.
India. He's
Hey,
it's not
bro,
governor, is it? What's the name for
Mornington. He
yeah,
was Governor
what's
General at Fort
Governor
William.
General? Thank you.
It becomes Viceroy much later on.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, but no, it's not about that. I can to this day I wonder about that comment at Waterloo when Uxbridge goes, "By God, sir, I've lost a leg," and Wellington goes, "Have you, by God?" And I would dearly love to know the tone of that "Have you, by God," and whether it was sort of mildly disinterested or whether there was genuine concern there, because it could be sort of archetypal British understatement, or it could be Wellesley casting some serious shade and doing what must be the 19th century equivalent of going calm as a bitch.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know, and I will never know, and I wish I knew the answer to that.
I feel like I feel like I have made a decision on that, and it's based on the testimony of one of Uxbridge's aides de camp. I think it's Seymour, who is the earliest account to, and we're completely off the rails here in 1815 for
Oh
some
God, yeah.
reason.
Where people,
But
if you were expecting like erudite comments to wrap up a Cintra episode, sorry, we've gone way off topic. Come back in 5 minutes.
but and I've forgotten exactly what he says was said. But he's the first one, I believe, to report on this interaction after the piece of grape shot hits Uxbridge. And it's actually nothing like "Have you, by God, so you have," something like that. It's it's much more on the term. It's much more of a sort of an "oh no" response.
Is that
Um,
sort of oh no or oh no?
well,
Again, you can interpret
it's in
this
your
two
head.
ways, right?
I am reporting it very ham-fistedly because I've forgotten exactly how it goes. But uh, Uxbridge says Uxbridge actually says something along the lines of, if we believe Seymour, um, Horace Seymour, I believe his name is, uh, like they've done for me at last, or something like that, or that something like that. And Wellington, I think, says, um, "By God, no," or something like that. It's much more of a concerned phrase, which tallies a lot more with the way Wellington probably actually was in real life as an raised in the 18th century, um, and actually not as tough as he seems. And you see actually this in Cintra, and we'll bring it back with this, um, because he is wounded by the public outcry to what has gone on. He feels very hard done to. He feels very slighted that his hard work at Vimeiro and after the capture of Lisbon has been just utterly trashed. And he overhears someone in a crowd during one of the pauses in the inquiry say, "What right is he to wear a sword?" And apparently that he remembered that, and it got to him. He doesn't show it because he's Wellesley, he's Wellington, but things could get to him. And so I feel like the I feel like the rivalry between himself and Uxbridge, due to I'm sure the very real affection he has for his sister-in-law, is mostly trumped up.
Yes. Wellesley, of course, not known for his fidelity, certainly later in life.
I would think he would understand more than criticize. Although I'm sure he did make a joke or two. I'm fairly certain he did probably say that I'll have to make sure he don't run away with me.
Yes. Was Uxbridge one of the better looking of the British Army's senior staff at the time? I'm trying to remember. I
Yeah,
can
he has
picture one
he
image of him when he's done up in sort of what I think is Hussar get up, and everybody a Hussar's uniform can make me look dashing.
um he has a similarly sort of hawkish profile to Wellington's, but without the prominent nose. It's somewhat more aquiline. The portraits are very flattering to him, so one presumes he was all right to look at.
As you say, we've gone a long way from Cintra, and we should probably call it a halt there. Josh, thank you as ever for your expertise and for the good fun chatting through this. I'm enjoying these sessions, and I know that fans of the show are as well. We will be back next month because why stop the fun now? But we do need to start looking at the Spanish side of things and build up to what will become the Coruña retreat. We're not going to jump straight there, folks. We need to flick back and look at the Spanish side of the saga and lay the foundations for one of the big balls ups of the Peninsular War on the British side. For sure.
One in a series now. We're going to ask you to think of the cumulative effect of everything that we just said in this episode, including Whitlock's debacle. And we're going to ask you to sum that up with Coruña and when it happens. But we're not there yet.
We're not there yet. Spoiler alert, Coruña does not go well. If you hadn't worked it out by now, you probably haven't been listening particularly intently. Josh, as I say, great to talk to you, folks. Josh is on Twitter at Land of History. You will also find his YouTube channel, Adventures in Historyland, hugely entertaining. You need to buy Bullock's Grain and Good Madeira. Please go support people who write books. Bullock's Grain and Good Madeira, published by Hellion, and also Wild East. Go look them up. Go buy them. You all love Josh's style by this point, so you're going to enjoy them. Josh, great to chat. We'll be back very soon. Folks, if you've enjoyed this show, please do me a favor. Head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a 5-star review. If you're not a regular listener, remember to hit that subscribe button so you can find your way back. All of those things are incredibly powerful in helping this show to reach a wider audience. Much love, as ever, to all my Patreon supporters. Shout outs to my Mentioned in Dispatches patrons, Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Jamie Kingston, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Coulson, Jim Getz, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Mark Trowbridge, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, David Graylick, Ted Andrews, David Milinski, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Carol Dixon Smith, Roland Shark, Giovanni, Jean-Baptiste Merlon, and Darla Vincent. And the Admirals, John Haynes, Ryan Diamond, JC Kaiser, Bob Burnham, Mike Guest, Liam Telfer, Todd and Ned Campbell, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Maxwell, David Priest, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Dan Hazelwood, Kate Walcombe, Clemens Beman, Charles McKay, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Tim Day, Mark Chestnut, and Jason Morn. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.